Hello, hello. Let me know, before I get started, let's see if anyone can hear me. The last live video I did, somebody told me afterwards, of course I couldn't do anything about it while I was driving, but I was told that no one could hear me. So let's, before I get on the road, hey, if you can hear me, give me a thumbs up. Tell me, yes, you can hear me. I want to make sure my volume is taken care of. Can anyone hear me? Can I get a thumbs up? All right, great. I'm getting thumbs up so people can hear me. Great, thank you, Phil, so I can actually drive now and not have to worry that people are going to come back and tell me they couldn't hear me and I wasted my time doing a video. Bobby, or should we say Don? Good evening. Oh, goodness. I can see Facebook is going to mess around and actually let people hear me today. Somebody must be asleep at the switch. Normally they would already lock me down and not let a lot of people see me. But good evening, y'all. Happy Wednesday. And how y'all doing? So, I came further out into Fairfax County to meet up with a longtime Facebook friend. Listen, I've told many of you, if you happen to make it to the DC area and you give me enough advance notice, I will do what I can to get a chance to meet up with you. And I have met with, oh goodness, I'm literally going to say dozens. It's probably in the dozens of Facebook friends, excuse me, people who I only know because of social media. And I have met with literally dozens of people who made their way to the Washington, D.C. metro area. And because they gave me enough of a heads up, I was able to make time in my schedule to go and meet up with them. And today was another one that I was very glad to do. You see in the title, it says that having dinner with, actually his name is David Pam McQuell. I don't know if my friend Marcia Smith is on here, but I'll be talking to her later on to let her know that, yeah, I got a chance to meet up with Dave. Many of you might be friends with Dave. If you're not, I'm sorry that you have not had a chance to meet him, but I just had dinner with him. And also want to say thank you to Jennifer Harris, no relation to me, who was gracious enough to be a host to Dave during his time here in the Washington, D.C. area as he gets ready to hop on a plane to go back to his home in Nigeria. And it was cool, man. I got a chance to have dinner with Dave. And, went to a favorite local spot, Coastal Flats. And let me have a stop. Let me see who's out there real quick. Say hi. Phil, how you doing? Bobby, Tiffany, Susan, and I'm driving again, so I can't see who's saying it. But let's see if I can take another quick look at the stoplight to be able to say hi to people. Maybe, maybe not. But see a few people. Susan and John, is it Kessler? Casali, I'm sorry if I'm butchering your name. Of course, Phil, Jonathan B. Smith, what's going on, Fred? Angie, hey, Miss Crenshaw, how you doing, dear? Stephen Atkins, what's up, brother? How you doing? Amanda and Jim and Sarge. Hey, Sarge, how you doing? Dan Evertua, my warrior for life, brother. How you doing, Dan? And is it Elise Steele, Lawrence? Hey, Hojo, how you doing, brother? Holly and everyone, good evening. So, yeah, I had a chance to spend a couple hours breaking bread with my brother in Christ, Dave McQuell. And Dave is an active Christian missionary in Nigeria. And I'll tell you, one of the things I do love. Hey, Holly, how you doing? James, how's it going, brother James? I met James Willis. He came out here to DC, and I got a chance to meet with him briefly. But once again, just telling you, and I'll say the same thing I said to everybody: if you live outside of the DC area, and you happen to make your way into the Metro DC area, give me enough advance notice. I can generally shift things around in my calendar, and I'd love to meet with and possibly break bread with you if you're going to be in the area. But yeah, I had a chance to meet with and have dinner with Dave. And one of the things I like so much about the Metro DC area, there's a lot of things I don't like. I mean, the taxes are crazy, the traffic's crazy, the humidity's crazy. But outside of that, it's actually a really cool place to live. But one of the things I do like is how cosmopolitan it is. That there's so many people. This is the meeting crossroads of the world. There's a reason why Christian churches were set up in places like Ephesus and Corinth and places like that. And that's because those were crossroads, trading crossroads. And so people were more likely, if you set up the gospel there, if you set up a ministry there, you were more likely to be able to reach people who would then go to other parts of the world and share, which is something that my church in particular really focuses on here in the Metro DC area, is because it is a crossroads to the world. You can share the gospel, and the gospel can go out to the whole world. I mean, like, my church has over 100 different ethnicities and nationalities represented, right? But every time I have a conversation with someone who is not an American, born and raised or naturalized rather, I love America even more. In fact, I always talk about how I was fortunate enough to have been raised primarily overseas because my father was in the Air Force. And so by the time I was 18 years old, I had spent 14 and a half years living in foreign countries. And here's what living in foreign countries made me do. It made me love America that much more. Don't get me wrong, I loved traveling, I loved experiencing the things that I experienced, but seeing other countries made me love America that much more. And being here in the Metro Washington, D.C. area, where there's so many people from so many other countries, and having conversations, because if you haven't figured it out, I will strike up a conversation with anyone. I like people like me. There's a funny thing about that, right? Just a message to the people who call themselves African Americans is, like, do you realize that if you don't walk around with a victim mentality, people will actually be drawn to you. So I don't get the same treatment in life. I don't have the same experiences that you have because of my mindset, because of the way I see the world. People are drawn to me. People treat me well. People treat me with respect, mainly because of the way I carry myself and mainly because of my own worldview. I get what I put out into the world. You understand? I get what I put out into the world. That's why I get treated well. Because I don't have a victim mentality. And meeting people like Dave, having a chance to sit and break bread with people like Dave, once again, just reminds me of what a blessing it is to be born in America and raised as an American. And I've said this before, and I know some people might say I think I'm being mean or harsh or anything like that, but I've said it, and I'll say it again. I would gladly trade 1,000 self-professed African Americans for one African like Dave who wants to be an American. I'll repeat that. I would gladly trade 1,000 self-professed African Americans for one African like Dave who wants to be an American. When I asked him, I said, hey, Dave, if the opportunity came up where you and your immediate family, his wife and his 3 kids, if the opportunity came up for you to come here to the United States, would you take it? And he's emphatically said yes. And I'll tell you, that's 5 Africans who want to be Americans. I would, without hesitation, if it was like push the button, it'll happen, I would push the button and trade 5,000 quote unquote African Americans for Dave and his family coming to the United States. Why? Because they want to be Americans. Because as Dave so emphatically said, he recognizes that the United States is the land of opportunity. He doesn't want to come here and be on welfare. He doesn't want to be dependent upon anybody. What Dave wants is the opportunity to thrive. What we were just saying before I was leaving, he said, because he was asking me about my organization and what I do with Unhyphenated America. And he said, hey, Chris, I've seen some of the things you said. Can you can you expound on it? And I said, Dave, I'm going to tell you the same thing I say on TV and radio. What is Unhyphenated America? We are exactly what we sound like. We're an organization that promotes the idea that America is best when it is unhyphenated. I do not refer to myself as an African American. Yes, I am someone who my family has done, as much as you can trust this to be accurate, my family has done our African ancestry, so I can tell you that in my father's biological line, that our bloodline comes from Angola, the Mbundu tribe from Angola. That on my mom's side, our biological line comes from the Fong people of Cameroon and Gabon. I can tell you that. But guess what? My family has been in the United States of America since at least 1813, and my direct paternal bloodline in terms of the people of African descent. Right? But guess what? Because my 3 times great-grandfather was the first black Harris born in the United States in 1813 on a plantation here in the Commonwealth of Virginia in Charles City County, which is in the Tidewater area about 15-20 miles away from the Jamestown settlement. Well, guess what? His father was white. And we pretty much know who that was. Can't tell for certain without a DNA test. We have a pretty good idea who that white guy was. And because we know who that white guy was, we've been able to do the genealogy to trace. And we know who his family was. And we know that that family line has been in the United States, or what would soon become the United States, since the early 1600s. That the first Harris born on future U.S. soil was born in something like 1625 off the top of my head. I can't remember. Which means his family came here before that. Right? So my direct paternal bloodline has been in the eventual United States for, 400 years, literally. But guess what? Yes, I am obviously of African heritage. But as Dave and I sat and talked about, see, Dave is of the Hausa tribe from Nigeria. And Dave and I had a great conversation. And one of the things he talked about is tribalism. He says, Chris, do you know about tribalism in Africa? He said, if black people, if African Americans had the slightest clue about how bad tribalism is on the African continent, they would never complain about racism in the United States. He says tribalism, he says people in the United States, black folks, African Americans if you will, complain, and they call it racism because someone didn't smile at them. And I know that's true. I've seen it. Or as Craig said, I seen it. Right? I have seen it myself. I've seen it. I've heard it. I've heard African Americans claim that something was racist, mainly because somebody wasn't all nice and warm and fuzzy to them, and they immediately attributed that to racism. And that is the catch-all for your average African American, that anything that they don't like, anything that they feel is preventing them from being all that they can be in these United States of America, they immediately attribute to the tried and true boogeyman of racism. Meanwhile, if you're not friends with Dave McQuell, if you see him, and I'll post a picture, and we talked about it, Dave is very black. In fact, when we were taking a picture, he said to the waitress, you know, maybe we should turn the. He said, "I'm very black," right? And look, when you see the picture, look, Dave is very black. You know, I mean, and he is ethnically of the Fulani tribe, who are Muslims, long since have converted to Islam, but Dave is a Christian. And he was telling me, you know, he's just talking about like the oppression, the real oppression of Christians in Nigeria. And he was telling me some of the realities about what happened in Africa overall under Obama. See, when people are wondering why Africans, Nigerians in particular, were cheering for and are praying for President Donald J. Trump, he's like, most Americans have no clue. He told me, he said, there's 3 things that Trump has done in Africa that most people don't even have any idea about. One of them had to do with Cameroon. And he said, you know, the long story short is there was some serious oppression going on, war crimes, atrocities going on. And there's some little tiny part of Cameroon that the people were being terribly oppressed. And there were tanks and all that stuff there. And he says, Chris, President Trump called the leader of Cameroon and told him, you've got 48 hours, 4-8, yes, 2 days, 48 hours to get those tanks out of there. And Dave said, Chris, you know, those tanks were gone within 12 hours. Think about that. He said, you got 48 hours. He called up an African president and said, you got 48 hours to get rid of the tanks that are being used to oppress people, and they were gone within 12 hours. But did any of us hear about that? I mean, I'll be honest, I know I don't really pay a whole lot of attention to what's going on in Africa. You know, it's not something that's normally put. I do try to pay attention to world affairs, but that's not one of those things that normally gets pushed to the forefront of the news. But he said 48 hours, it was done in 12 hours. The second thing he said was the Nigerian president. The Nigerian president came to the United States, and although Trump never talked about it, the Nigerian president talked about it later on. He said that when he was in the office with President Trump looked him in the eye and said, why are you killing Christians? Now, that question never got asked by Obama. President Trump looked him in the face and said, what's up with you killing Christians? Right? I mean, that's the kind of stuff that, you know, we don't hear about. And then, and I want to say it was like the previous Nigerian dictator, warlord, or whatever like that. Apparently he made off with a bunch of cash during the Obama administration. And that has happened all the time. If you know the history of most of West Africa, they've had corrupt leader after corrupt leader, and every time the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, or the World Bank loans money to these African nations, ostensibly for infrastructure projects, right? They say, oh, we want to help build up our country. We want to be able to have trade, so we need roads and so on and so forth. And so the IMF or whatever other entity will write a loan for X billion dollars to the nation of Nigeria or Cameroon or Liberia or Ivory Coast, whatever you name the West African nation. They'll write a check, and guess what happens? 90% of that money automatically gets funneled to whoever the main dictator is and his family and their cronies. And no roads get built, or whatever little tiny sliver of a fraction of the road of the money gets used towards what it was supposed to be used for, like infrastructure projects. And he said, listen, I'm not a big fan of George Bush, but Dave was saying, he says, man, people don't even realize what George Bush did for Africans. So essentially you had two white Republicans, George Bush and Donald J. Trump, who've done more for Africa than the Kenyan Barack Obama ever did. And in fact, one of the things he says, man, people don't even realize is that under Obama, whenever the Secretary of State, which was John Kerry and Hillary Clinton, whenever they would go to Nigeria, they would always spend their time in the northern parts where the Hausa Fulani Muslims were running things. And then it was only towards the end when he sent David Axelrod, one of his chief consiglieres, to come down to like Lagos and Abuja and places like that to kind of show their face. But otherwise, you know, that's all they were doing. And of course, the same thing, he said, like, I think it was a Kenya, they was talking about how under Obama, he spent, I don't know, X millions of dollars, I don't remember the exact number, but he spent all that time trying to convince Kenya to rewrite their constitution. And also, of course, as you may well know, that a large part of the thing that Obama was pushing on the African continent was trying to push for acceptance of the alphabet people, and that's all I'm going to call them, the alphabet people in Africa. And thankfully, many of those African nations told him, you can kick rocks, dude. Right? And it's just, but like having these conversations with Dave, man, it's just, you know, knowing that he's getting ready to get on a plane in 2 days to go back to his native Nigeria. That Dave got stuck here, by the way. He came here in February or something like that. And then COVID hit. And he has not been able to go back. He's been stuck in the United States for like 7 months. He was only going to be here for a couple of weeks. And because of COVID, he's been stuck in the United States for 7 months. And he was out there on the West Coast in the Seattle area, Federal Way, Seattle area for most of that time. And he was like, Chris, the devastation and all the drama that happened, he got a chance to witness all that was happening in Seattle. And he said, man, I don't understand why these people in Seattle are so mad and they feel so dejected and all that. He says, when they have so much here in America. And we've talked about that. I talk about that all the time. Quite frankly, your average garden variety African American irks the hell out of my nerves. Seriously. Your cousin and them, as I call them, they irk the hell out of my nerves. Because, and one of the things that Dave and I talked about, and I had arguments with one of my literal cousins. She passed away earlier this year, God rest her soul, but, you know, I told her, I said, you don't realize the average African in America has little to no regard for African Americans. And there's a simple reason why. It can be summed up, and Dave echoed the same thing. 2 words: ungratefulness and laziness. Ungratefulness and laziness. Those are the 2 words he used, and most Africans feel the exact same way. See, one of the things with me, as I told you, I like people like me. People tend to have very open, honest conversations with me. I mean, it's kind of weird because it's not like I even go around asking about it, but for some reason people sit down and act like I'm their therapist or whatever, and they just tell me all kind of stuff that I'm like, man, I didn't know if I really needed to know all that, but okay, I hope you feel better kind of getting it off your chest. But people show a level of transparency with me that is fascinating. And yeah, the average African, if they're being honest, will tell you they have little to no regard for quote-unquote African Americans because they generally redeem self-professed African Americans. They generally deem self-professed African Americans to be ungrateful and lazy. Why? Because those Africans know what it's like back home. That's why. They know what it's like. And he's like, David said, he says, man, I know people. I mean, we just sat down and had a great meal. And I was acutely aware of the fact that, yeah, I mean, you know, we ate a very nice meal that would have fed quite a few other people. I don't feel guilty for it because we have abundance here in the United States. The thing is, I'm grateful for the abundance that we have here in the United States. I appreciate the fact that the way we live here is far and above that as how most of the people in the rest of the world live. My wife and I were watching Braveheart the other day. And I was pointing out to my wife, I said, you know, babe, when you think about it, the average American, and we'll just say the average American in general, but even the average so-called self-professed African American lives a more comfortable life. Listen to my words. The average American, especially the average African American, lives a more comfortable life than royalty lived 100 years ago. I mean, we can sit there and talk about, like, you know, was it Massa Musa, who was supposedly the richest man to ever live, you know, and he had millions of slaves or whatever like that. But when you sit there and think about, for example, even something like a chair, a lazy boy chair that any American can go buy is way more comfortable than the thrones that royalty sat on for centuries. Even stuff like, how about bathrooms? How about running water? Right? Guess what? If you were the King of England, 100 and something, let's say, you know, turn of the 20th century, you took a crap in a pot. Right? The King and Queen of England took a crap in a pot 120 years ago. What do you think a chambermaid was? That was the person who had the unenviable job of emptying the ceramic pot filled with human refuse. You know, I mean, like, we live way more comfortable lives than most royalty have lived throughout history. But yet you have people born and raised in these United States of America who have a similar melanin content that I have, and all they can do is whine and complain about the state of their life, and they'll sit there and go, well, this person of this other ethnicity didn't smile at me. They're racist. I feel oppressed. Life is terrible here in the United States. And this is where I'm telling you, I would literally, easily, without hesitation, I promise you, if there was a button that I could press, I would be pressing the heck out of that button. I would literally easily trade 1,000 self-professed African Americans for one African who wants to be an American, who wants to come here and be an unhyphenated American. 1,000 to 1 trade without hesitation. Why? Because they realize that America's best when it's unhyphenated. Guys like Dave realize that tribalism is wretched, tribalism is folly, tribalism is unproductive. That nations like Nigeria and most of West Africa are rich with natural resources. You know, you got these museum grade morons. Yes, you have all these. Whenever you hear somebody say, well, you know, the land was stolen from the Native Americans, you know what I'm saying? That's why America's rich, because they went around stealing the land and the native and the natural resources. You're a moron. And your mama's probably stupid too. Just gonna keep it real with you. You don't have the slightest clue about Econ 101. You're clueless. Because even if you have the natural resources, if you don't have the capital, if you don't have the knowledge of what to do with natural resources, who cares about the land, right? I mean, you can have the land. You could literally, there's a book, right? Great book by Russell Conwell, who's the founder of Temple University, and it's called Acres of Diamonds. It's a little short book. You know, even if you're like a lot of people and you graduated from high school and you were basically a high school pushout because you could only read on the 8th grade level, but they gave you a diploma anyway, you know, that happens far too often. You could read a book like Acres of Diamonds, right? It's a simple read. And the concept is simple. There is wealth right beneath your feet. But you're so busy looking for wealth in other places, thinking that you're somehow deprived of wealth, you don't even realize that wealth begins in your mind. Here's what Dave recognized. He recognized, like I talk about, the importance of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Those three foundational principles that are ascribed in our foundational documents. Because what good is life, or what good is anything if you don't have life, right? You got to have life to begin with. Liberty, you have to be free. What good is it to be alive if you're not free? And the pursuit of happiness, the ability to pursue your own self-interest, making sure that you're not depriving someone else of their unalienable rights. These are things that Dave and I talked about. And you know, something else he said that really just kind of got to me. He says there are people who they haven't had fresh water. And I talk about this all the time. There's billions, literally billions of people on the planet right now who do not have direct access to fresh water. They have to walk miles to either a stream or to a well to get fresh water. And here it is, man, we get mad when we're like, oh man, did you give me tap water? Man, I need bottled water. I don't drink water out of the tap. We complain because somebody gave us tap water instead of bottled water, right? And they're like, man, I'll take water as long as there's not feces floating in it. Like, I was looking at something that was in the Ganges River, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, in India. And it just like, I'm not a full-blown germaphobe, but I got a little germaphobe in me. And like, I got the willies. I was like, ah, right? Because it was showing these women in India bathing and washing their clothes and all that in the Ganges River. And then the pictures showed like 50 yards away, there was a dead, rotting cow in the river. And I was like, oh. And I'm just sitting there thinking like, ew, like, that's a dead cow, like, in the river, just feet up in the air, just nasty, rotting, and God knows, like, the person up the river from you, what they're doing in the water, and people just, hey, this is life. You know, that's life in so many other places in the world, but yet our education system has indoctrinated people to believe that they got it bad here in the United States. And one of the things that Dave talked about was like, he says, man, most people, he says, there's a reason why the suicide rate in Africa is almost non-existent. And I said, you know, Dave, you're right. That is so true. Listen, I'm not making light of the mental illness that I know a lot of people face. But let's just be real. Like, how come more people in Africa don't have the mental illness that leads to them committing suicide? It's a legitimate question. How come so many people, how come there's not a whole lot of people in West Africa who are depressed and feel the need to commit suicide? Don't you think that's a valid question? And he was like, he said, yeah, well, basically, people go to bed and they got nothing. They have nothing. They really have no reason to hope for more, to hope for better, but yet they wake up every day and say, today could be a better day. And you got people born and raised in these United States of America who have all the resources available to them, and they say, well, it's hopeless. And it just trips me out because, yeah, I got to go back, and I'd be remiss if I did a video and I didn't mention two heroes of mine. One of them, of course, being that dude, Booker T. Washington, and the other one being that dude, Thomas Sowell. But Thomas Sowell, one of the things he always says, he says, you know, there's that old economist joke when people ask, how you doing? And he said the old economist joke is to say, compared to what? Right? Because there's three questions at the average that you can ask just about every leftist that'll debunk every argument that they try to make. The first question is, at what cost? Right? When they say we should do this, do that, or this should happen, or that should happen, you can always ask them, at what cost? The second question is, compared to what? And the third question is, where's your hard evidence? And so that always rings in my mind, and I was sitting there thinking, because, listen, I am far more of a sympathetic person than people realize. Yes, I'm very blunt and direct about a lot of things, but I'm very sympathetic to children and helpless people, vulnerable people who are suffering. But I believe in putting things in the proper context. You will always see and hear me talking about things being put in the proper context. Yes, it's terrible how children in places like Baltimore, for example, have such substandard educations. It's terrible that you got Kwame Nkrumah, who's the incoming U.S. representative to replace John, what's his name? Oh, Fatneck, who died. I'm sorry, Lord, forgive me. I'm not supposed to talk trash about him, but Elijah Cummings, to replace Elijah Cummings, right? And you got the current mayor, and cities like Baltimore, cities like Washington, D.C., millions and billions of dollars given to these school systems, and they can't get the heat turned on in the school. The children are freezing in the schools. They're burning up in the summer and they're freezing in the winter, but yet these corrupt, inept, weapons-grade morons, African Americans who are running the public school systems in places like Baltimore and Detroit and DC, they're so wretched, they're so wicked, they're so corrupt. They're the first ones to say we need more money. But yet, I got friends like one of my frat brothers who went to Uganda. Is it Uganda? Uganda, yes. And people here, they talk about, oh, well, the schools are crowded. The reason why the kids are not doing well is because the schools are crowded. We need smaller classrooms. You know what I'm saying? Okay, then why was it that he took this mission trip to Uganda and he goes there regularly? And he said, Chris, this classroom is full of elementary school kids, no more than 5th or 6th grade. There's 100 students in this classroom. 100, yes, 100. 100 students in this classroom, one teacher and one assistant, with a classroom with 100 students. And the kids are just as orderly as they could be. Why? It's because of, here it is, drum roll, you know it's coming, the culture. Because these children recognize and appreciate that education is their future. The parents instilled that in them. So when they go to school, they sit there. Yes, sir. No, sir. Yes, ma'am. No, ma'am. And they're coming prepared to learn. You have these same kids here in the United States, and they're wearing name brand clothes and so on and so forth, and the teacher can't educate them because there's always one or two. Most of the kids probably do inherently have a desire to learn, don't get me wrong, but the teacher is not fully able to educate because the culture is not one that holds education in high esteem. The culture is not one where it says to the kids, you will behave. You will not be a distraction in class. Culture makes all the difference. The parents in these places like Uganda have to make tremendous sacrifices they consider to be a huge blessing for their children to have the opportunity to go to school. Yet here in the United States, even as bad as the education system might be, you have parents who don't make sure that their kids go to school. It's mandatory for your children to go to school. And yet the parents are not active participants in their child's education. And I don't want to hear all the crap about how, well, it's hard because, brothers and sisters out there, they're struggling, And I'm like, okay, so do you think that the people in Uganda or any other West African nation who are sending their kids to get education, do you think life is easy for them? You don't think they're struggling to be able to send that you don't think they're making huge sacrifices to be able to allow at least one of their children to go and get an education? Boy, please, go sit your behind down somewhere with your whining self. Listen, your culture sucks. There's no nice way to say it. I wish I could find a nicer way to say it. The reason why things are the way they are, there's a difference. There is a difference. Everybody of the particular ethnicity, everybody of a particular skin color is not from the exact same culture. You got guys like Dave McQuell who will tell you that there's all kind of people who are dark-skinned in the nation of Nigeria, but yet Nigeria has at least 3 major tribes. You got the House of Fulani, you got the Igbo, and you have the Yoruba, and they're not the same. They don't have the same culture. And guess what? I am an American black man. And I don't have the same culture as the people who choose to identify as African Americans. We have an entirely different culture, an entirely different mindset, a different view towards education, a different view towards economics, a different worldview, a different faith. We're not the same. But you get to choose your culture. You understand that once you become an adult, you get to choose your culture. You might have been raised in the wretched subculture of African Americanism. If so, I feel sorry for you. But guess what? I'm here to tell you, if you're hearing the sound of my voice, if you're watching this video, please understand, you do not have to remain in that wretched subculture. You can become an American black man like myself, which we'll just call ourselves Americans for short. Because you're still going to be black. This paint job I was born with, came out the womb with it. I kind of like it, not trying to get rid of it. It does real well in the sun, in the summertime. I like it. Despite all those morons out there who think if you're a conservative black person that you want to be white, which by the side, look, complete side note, there is nobody with lower self-esteem. There's nobody who envies white people. There's nobody who embraces white supremacy more than your garden variety African American. I tell people like this, here it is real simple. I've been around white folks enough in my life to know that there's absolutely nothing inherently superior about white folks. Now, is that a derogatory statement about white people? No, don't be stupid. It's the English language. There is nothing inherently superior about being born with less melanin. There's nothing inherently superior about being born with more melanin. And there's damn sure nothing inherently inferior about being born with a permanent tan like I had. The only difference is culture. It is the agreed upon set of norms, mores, values, and traditions held by a group of people. And I'm here to tell you, I was not raised in a culture of inferiority. But if you choose to embrace the wretched subculture of African Americanism, you were and you are. I'm just going to keep it real with you. See, people like my friend Dave, once again, he's an African who wants to be an American. And as I told him, I said, Dave, if there was a way for me to sponsor you to get here, I'd do it in a heartbeat. Because you would come here and you would be an American. You would respect the fact that you have access, that your life is protected. You would respect the fact that you have liberty being protected. And you would respect the fact that the government is here to help protect your right to pursue your happiness. See, there's a reason why many of those African nations are foundering and squander. They're squandering their natural rights, their natural resources. It's because their culture. I'm going to tell you, listen, I'm going to, once again, hit you right between the eyes, right? There's no difference in the mindset between the Congressional Black Caucus type Negroes who are running places like Baltimore, running places like Atlanta, running places like Detroit. You name the place where there's African Americans in leadership, and there's no difference between their mindset and the mindset of, you name the corrupt African, West African, South African, you name the corrupt African nation, and there's no difference. You can transport those people from the wretched subculture of African Americanism who are in Atlanta, Detroit, DC, so on and so forth, and you can put them in Africa, and they would run things the exact same way. You can flip-flop. You can flip-flop the dictators and all that of African nations with these wretched African Americans, and there would be no difference in the way they do things. They're either amazingly corrupt or stunningly inept. And that's the reason why things are the way they are. There's a reason why Africans like Dave want to get out. They love their mother country, but they want to get out because they realize that their nation is corrupt. They realize that that the people who are in charge have no desire, and there's no cultural backing to protect unalienable rights. And it's not just, I'm not beating up on Africa. Look, here's the reality. Let's look at what could be called the middle. Listen, I don't know, they might censor me if I say this. China. Let's just say China. Or as the president says, China. Right? Here's the reality. There is no history of liberty in China. Let's look at the former Soviet Union or Russia. Let's look at Russia, which was formerly part of the Soviet Union. No one in the history of Russia has any institutional knowledge, cultural knowledge of the idea of liberty. No one. You know why? Because let's say you were born in 1991, whatever the year was, right? You were born after the end of the Cold War, the Berlin Wall fell down. Okay, your mom and dad spent their entire lives under communism. And your grandparents spent their entire lives under communism. Your great-grandparents might have been alive to see the Russian Revolution, the glorious Russian Revolution between the Bolsheviks and Mensheviks, right? Because they're going to overthrow the czars and give freedom to mankind. Those terrible czars, we're going to get rid of them. Trust us. Put your trust and faith in us. We're going to free the people. Power to the people. That's what we communists are here to do. Because, as Orwell talks, is it Orwell? I'm drawing a blank. I think it's Orwell. Animal Farm. Was it Orwell Animal Farm? It'll come to me later on. Animal Farm, the book, anyway. As was talked about in Animal Farm, all pigs are equal, but some pigs are more equal than others. Because that's exactly what happened in Animal Farm, right? I mean, it was just an allegorical story to help tell the Russian Revolution that they threw off the yoke of oppression from the czars, like the farmer, right? You know, you get a few people, the pigs are going to get together and we're the smartest of them. And if you trust in us farm animals, look at how the farmer utilizes us. He uses us and for his own pleasure, and we're going to trust us, get behind us. We're going to get rid of the czars, right? And what happened? They immediately went into communism. And what do? They were worse than the czars, right? They were worse than the czars. They had more of an iron fist than the Tsars did. And guess what? Russians were ruled by Tsars for what, 700 years? I'm a little fuzzy. I think it's something like 1200 AD or whatever is when the first of the Russian Tsars, and forgive me if I can't remember that number off the top of my head, but let's just say at least 500 years that the Russians were ruled by Tsars. And they trusted the communists. Power to the people. We're going to throw off the farmer. And what the farmer do, or the pigs do, they immediately became more tyrannical than the Tsars. People in Russia have no history of liberty. People in China have no history of liberty. Their entire lives, they're a very collectivist society, and their entire culture is built on collectivism and falling under the control of absolute rule. But you know what's so fascinating is so many of them, when they escape those places and they move to some place in the West, specifically places like the United States of America, they're so grateful. They're so grateful to have the opportunity to be in a place like the United States where they actually have freedom. Something they never knew. Like freedom was like just this nebulous thing. Somewhere in the back of their mind, they thought it might be possible, but they didn't know about freedom. Nobody in the history of their family ever knew about freedom. They have been under the yoke of oppression for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. And they appreciate the opportunity to be free in a place like the United States of America. And I'll just say, Dave and I had a great conversation because we talked about like the difference. And I some of you may have heard this, some of you have not. I'm going to say this as I get ready to close. We were talking about some Bible things and just like context, right? I'm always going to try to provide context. Most people don't know the actual numbers. To me, knowing the numbers and everything in the proper context makes a huge difference. Many people like to put all the blame for the state of the world, and they say the United States is the worst nation on earth, and look at, we have the stain of slavery. But there were roughly there are different slave trades, African slave trades that took place. Excuse me. It was happening in 3 different places. You had the trans-Indian slave trade, where Africans were transported across the Indian Ocean into India, up into Pakistan, Bangladesh, the rest of Asia, right? Which, by the way, there's literally a few pockets of black people in places like, India and all that survived somehow the trans-Indian slave trade, right? Then there's a trans-Saharan slave trade, which is ongoing, has never stopped. Arab Muslims have been carrying out the transatlantic slave trade since their moon god death cult was created, right? But everybody wants to focus on the transatlantic slave trade, which was the most short-lived. That Western nations, although yes, Western nations have responsibility for the part that they took in, them taking part in the transatlantic slave trade, but doggone it, they also helped to end the transatlantic slave trade. And when you look at the numbers, during the time period that the transatlantic slave trade was legal, there were roughly, because remember, this was a trade, this was a business. Remember, all businesses, real businesses, keep records, they keep documentation. And because the societal norms said that slavery was no big deal, it was a business, it was a trade, because the societal norms throughout history said that, then those businesses kept records. And Henry Louis Skip Gates, the esteemed professor of history at Harvard University, who is of the Beergate fame from the Obama era, he has the numbers. I'm going to skip and I'll tell you the number then, but there were roughly 12 million Africans who were transported, who were put on ships in Africa and transported across the Atlantic Ocean to the Western Hemisphere. Now, We've all seen or heard about the horrors of the slave trade and the way blacks or Africans were kept like worse than cattle. And there was spoilage. As every business knows, they're going to lose a certain amount of their cargo. And it was not unusual, it was the norm that they lost a certain number of their cargo. And so, of the approximately 12 million African slaves who were put on ships to leave Africa and transport to the Western Hemisphere, roughly 10.5 million of them survived the dreaded Middle Passage. The horrors of the Middle Passage, roughly 10.5 million survived. Now, I ask people this question all the time. Do you know how many of those 10.5 million Africans ended up on the shores of the future 13 colonies? And I always ask people, give me your guess, give me your guess. I'm asking people what, and people give me, 3 million, 5 million, 6, 7, 8 million, right? And everybody guesses these large numbers, and they're shocked when I tell them, well, you're way off, because of the 10.5 million roughly who survived the dreaded Middle Passage, 5 million of them alone ended up in Brazil. Did you hear me? 5 million. Basically half of them ended up in Brazil alone. And here's how you know. See, this is context. This is how you know it's true. The 1860 census in the United States counted everybody. White males who were heads of households and white males under the age of such age. White females, it counted all. And it counted slaves and all other free people who were free blacks, right? In the 1860 census, go and look it up. If you doubt me, go look it up. There were 4.4 million. This is an approximate number. Don't quote the, if I get the numbers not exact, right? Roughly 4.4 million black people were in America in 1860. The transatlantic slave trade was abolished in roughly 1806 or 1801, right around, let's just say early 1800s. Is when the transatlantic slave trade was outlawed and abolished. So, if there were only 4.4 million in 1860, 60 years roughly after the transatlantic slave trade was abolished, it stands to reason that there's no way that of the 10.5 million, that the majority were brought to the shores of the 13 colonies. It's math. It's doing the logic, right? The reality is, there were roughly 388,000, we'll call it 390,000, nice round numbers, Africans were brought to the shores of the future 13 colonies. So, less than 4% of all the African slaves came to the 13 colonies. See, when you know the facts and you know them in a proper context, it changes everything. Why did the United States get so much blame for something that we played a relatively small part in? Brazil was the last nation in the Western Hemisphere to give up their slaves. They had the largest number, and they were the last ones to give up their slaves. They had to be forced by the British government in the 1870 or something like that to give up their slaves. Everybody acts like the United States was the worst place, but we had the fewest number of slaves. Am I excusing slavery? No, don't be stupid. No, I'm not excusing slavery. I'm telling you the reality of the world in its proper context, giving you perspective. 390,000 out of 10 plus million. Now you fast forward, so we'll just round up, we'll call it 4%. Here's what's interesting. Today, and this is what Dave and I were talking about, there are approximately, once again, saying approximately, there are approximately 1 billion people who are part of what would be called the African diaspora. What does that mean? People of non-Arab, Muslim, sub-Saharan African descent, right? So we're not talking about the people from Libya and Egypt, all that. We're talking about the Cushites, if you will, the people from Sudan, the people from Ethiopia, the people from Somalia, the people from South Africa and West Africa, all those people who are basically non-Arab Muslims. And then, because remember, of the 10.5 million African slaves, over half of them ended up in Brazil. Did you know that they ended up in places in like South America, like Guyana and all that? Go to places like Guyana and you'll see like half the population is jet black, looking like you. If I dropped you off in places like Guyana, you would think I dropped you off in Africa because everybody's black. Why? Because of the transatlantic slave trade. But when you run the numbers, it's interesting that there's roughly 1 billion African people of African diaspora in the world, and there's only about 45 million African Americans, black people in the United States. And guess what? We live by far, as I talked about in the beginning, by far the most comfortable lives. I mean, aggregate. I'm talking about on a whole. Of course, there's some people in Africa and some people who live extravagant lives. I'm talking about as a whole, the aggregate American blacks, African Americans, whatever the heck you want to call it, people who have permanent tans, who are the descendants of slaves taken from Africa, people, black people in the United States of America, by far, undoubtedly, it's unassailable, live the highest standard of life of anyone in the African diaspora. Hands down, no argument. There's roughly 2,600 people in the world who are billionaires. The number might have changed recently, who knows, the stock market, but the last time I checked, it was somewhere in the neighborhood of like 2,600 people in the world who are billionaires. Roughly 600 or so of them are in the United States, so we'll call that roughly 20%, right? You know, roughly 20% of all the billionaires in the world are in the United States of America. There are only 14, think about it, out of 2,600 billionaires, there are only 14 who are of African heritage. And 7 of those 14 are American blacks, African American, whatever the heck you want to call them, the American descendants of slaves. 7 of the 14. We are the fortunate 4.5%. We're going to round up this 45 million out of a billion. We'll call it, we're the fortunate 4.5%. Just like the story of Joseph in the Bible, when his brothers meant ill, because his brothers were jealous of him, they were angry, they were willing to kill him, but cooler heads prevailed, and rather than kill their brother out of anger and jealousy, they decided to sell him into slavery. And if you go back and read your Bible, you'll know the rest of the story. But long story short, Joseph ended up as the number 2 man in Egypt. His family that had sold him to slavery ended up having to come and face him, did not know who he was. It's a great story. Once again, go back and read it. But when he did reveal himself to his brothers, one of the things he made clear, he says, guess what? No, I understand. Yeah, what you did was messed up, right? Y'all did me dirty, man. You did me wrong. But what you intended for evil, God meant for good. I'll say it again. What you intended for evil, God meant for good. As terrible as slavery was, as much as it had to have sucked for my ancestors, I don't even want to think about what my ancestors had to endure, the ones who were on the transatlantic slave trade, who went through the Middle Passage. Life had to suck for them. For my 3 times great-grandfather who was born on a plantation here in Virginia in 1813, life had to suck for him to be born as a slave. For his mother, who bore him from a white guy. And I don't know whether it was, what's the words I'm looking for? I don't know whether she was a willing participant in the copulation that created my 3 times great-grandfather. So, If she was raped, it probably sucked really bad for her. It sucked to be a slave. But you know, if you put things in its proper context, proper perspective, 6 generations later, life has been really good for me here. And if you are an American descendant of slaves, what others may have intended for evil, God meant for good, and you should develop a spirit of appreciation. Not appreciation that your family was put into slavery. Slavery sucked. But I'm sure it sucked being a slave for Joseph. I'm sure it sucked when he was accused of rape, something he did not do, and he was thrown into a dungeon for years. I'm sure all that sucked. But guess what? David ended up being the number 2 guy in Egypt, and he was able to not only save all of Egypt, but save his people. What others intended for evil, God intended for good. I am the beneficiary of that. And if you are hearing the sound of my voice right now, and you're an American descendant of slaves, you're a black person here in the United States of America, what you should do is you should stop and think. And then you should drop to your knees and give all honor and glory and praise to God and be appreciative that he allowed you to be born here in the United States of America and the time that he allowed you to be born. Because there are billions of people who would trade places with you in a heartbeat. That's why a lot of Africans have no respect for you self-professed African Americans, because they know what the rest of the world is like. They know what history has been like. They know what the future holds for them and most of their family. Struggle, real struggle, strife, war, famine. That's what the future holds for most of them. They know that. And that's why, if they had the opportunity, for all you museum grade morons talking about, I want to go back to Africa. If I could snap my fingers and make it happen, I'd do it. You'd be standing in the middle of the Congo in a heartbeat. You'd be standing in the middle of Lagos, Nigeria in a heartbeat. You'd be in South Africa in a heartbeat. I would exchange, I've told you, I would gladly, without hesitation, if all it took was pressing a button, I would press the button and I would exchange 1,000 of you ungrateful African Americans for just one African who wants to come here and be an American. Because they would be grateful and they wouldn't be lazy, and they would go out of their way to be defenders of the foundational principles of the United States: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, because they know what it's like to not have that. And I want to say thank you to Dave Miguel. I'm appreciative for the time we had tonight at dinner. I pray for traveling mercies for you as you return back home to Nigeria to see your family that you have not been able to see for the past 7 months due to circumstances beyond your control. And Dave, I continue to pray for the work that you are doing and for the safety of your family, because while black folks here in the United States are complaining and they're saying that, the cops are targeting us, you got industrial grade morons like LeBron James with his old big beta male self talking about they hunting us, it's not safe to be here. No, you know who's being hunted? Dave McQuell and his family are hunted in Nigeria. You live in a freaking mansion, LeBron, you big sissy. Shut your whining behind up. Oh my God. You know what? You needed a daddy so bad. Oh my God, I can't stand you. You big whiner, they hunting us. No. People like Dave McQuell get hunted in their home country. He has to worry about Boko Haram coming and killing and raping and killing his whole family and burning their houses down. There's been more people struck by lightning in the United States of America so far this year than there have been unarmed black men killed by the cops in the United States of America. You have a greater chance of being struck by lightning than you do being an unarmed, and when I say unarmed black man, I'm not talking about like, okay, you're fighting the cops. I'm talking about, they make it sound, the guys like LeBron act like you're a black man, you're just walking down the street, zippity-doo-dah, just, you know, and then all of a sudden the cops jump out and say, bang, got you, Negro, and they just shot you, right? They act like that's what's happening. It's a lie from the pit of hell, and LeBron, oh my, listen, I'm just going to, look, oh God, I'm going to pray for you, LeBron, because if I say what I wanted to say, I'm just going to pray that God touches your little wretched mind, you moron, because you don't know what you're talking about, and everybody who listens to you is growing stupider by the second. See, I'm getting all fired up, and I was trying to wind down. I was trying to wind this down, and now I'm just getting fired up thinking about it, because I can't stand ungrateful people. I can't stand ungrateful people. And everybody who thinks like LeBron James is ungrateful and not worthy of the blessing of being an American. And I'll say it one more time in closing. If I had the opportunity, if I could push a button and make it happen, I would gladly swap out 1,000 LeBron James type Negroes for one African like David McQuell, who wants to come here and be an American. I'm Christopher Harris, Executive Director of Unhyphenated America. Thanks for listening in. I gotta go. Take care. God bless.